Good afternoon, everyone. Uh, Welcome to today's last session, Biography, the only true history with a question mark. My name is Abhishek Chaudhary. Uh, I am, like both of them, a biographer, and which is why, after eating a rather very fat lunch, I found myself being declared the moderator for this session. So, pardon me if I occasionally mumble or fumble. Um, Sharmishtha Mukherjee is a dancer, choreographer, politician, ex-politician, okay, and has recently published her first book, Pranab, My Father, which, as the title suggests, is about our former president and generally a popular cabinet minister, Pranab Mukherjee. Amrita Shah is a journalist, editor, writer. She has so far published 4 books and is very soon going to publish a 5th book, if I'm not wrong. Okay. So, without wasting any time, I'll begin with Amrita. You published your biography of Vikram Sarabhai Amrita before you published your book on Ahmedabad, which is called Ahmedabad, the city in the world, and it came out in 2015, if I'm not wrong.
Ahmedabad came out in
Right.
2015.
Tell us, did the first one lead to the second one? And how different was researching the biography of a man from researching the biography of a city? That's one question. And generally speaking, what was your motivation in plunging, into the project?
So yeah, the Sarabhai book did lead to the Ahmedabad book. In fact, what happened was because I was going back and forth, I was going to Gujarat that much in the period when just post 2002. So I sort of saw very different, a lot of journalists were going in, reporting on the violence and then, going back. But I was there talking to ordinary people. So I kind of I saw something happening, which I thought was going to be some sort of kind of harbinger for what's going to happen in India. And so I thought I have to study this. And the reason why it took the shape of a city biography is a little too complicated for me to go into right now.
Sure.
So, writing a biography of a city and a person, very different, I think. Is one thing remains the same is that I feel like I'm always trying to solve a puzzle. Like a detective trying to understand what makes this thing tick, whether it's a person or a city. But it is very different because there is a sort of unifying element with a person, and with a city, there's just so much more, and the layers, and it's much broader, and your research sources, of course, are far more varied than when you're looking at a person. What motivated me to do the Sarabhai book? So I was very young when Vikram Sarabhai died, and I have a very clear memory of the newspaper coming home, and I think it was just before the New Year, and my mother sort of had this reaction, and I said, "What happened?" And she said, "A great scientist died." And I was very surprised because my mother had no interest in science, but then she started telling me about him, who he was, his family, his very illustrious family, involved in the freedom movement, extremely distinguished, cultured, and very wealthy, and that he was married to someone from the south who was a dancer, so very cosmopolitan. And anyway, so he followed the news for a while, saw that the daughter had lit the funeral pyre. So all of it is very inspiring for a young person.
And 1971, if I'm not wrong, and
Yeah.
at a rather very young age of 52.
Yes. And anyway, so now fast forward to the year 2000. I'm in Ahmedabad. My mother has just passed away. And for the first time, I'm in Ahmedabad, not on a professional, someone is showing me around the city. And I'm seeing Vikram Sarabhai's name everywhere. So I had a kind of memory, and I said, I want to read a book on him. And just briefly to say, in between what had happened is I'd done a book on television. And if you read about the history of television, then Vikram Sarabhai is extremely instrumental. He had this idea of using television for development. And I knew that he had interesting views on the bomb, so there were all these many things that were intriguing me about him. And anyway, that's why the book.
Okay. Well, coming to you, Sharmishtha, partly because this is your first book, tell us what motivated you to write a book on your father so soon after his death. That's one. You call it an emotional and a healing journey. Tell us about generally your process of writing, and especially how did you, if at all, did you manage to ensure that you did not bring in too much of your own bias? And a very a tale to it is there a particular reason you focused on the last phase of his career and not so much the early decades of his career or his growing up years? Is there a particular reason?
Well, firstly, let me tell you, I'm an accidental author. And I really feel that I have gate crashed into this august galaxy of very serious writers. And the beginning, the idea of this book was my father's diaries. My father had this habit of keeping diaries since many, many years. The earliest one I got was some, 1972. And the journalist used to ask, obviously, it was a lot of curiosity for the journalist or even for his friends that, are you going to publish the diaries? So he said, no, it is going to be done only posthumously, and I'm going to leave them with my daughter. It's up to her whether she publishes them or whatever she wants to do. So after he passed away, it was kind of, I don't know, I will not call it a duty because my father never said that, you have to write something on me. But it became a emotional thing. And then when I started reading about his diaries, I felt a lot of it. He wrote his own 4 volumes of political autobiography. And so a lot of it has been already stated. Certain things were unsaid, so which I have, some of it I have tried to incorporate in my book. And my book, I would not call it a biography, because in the very preface itself, I wrote that this is not a biography, because a biography, I think, need far thorough research and a degree of objectivity from your subject. So firstly, I was not willing to put in, I don't have the patience to do such thorough research, because, and also I knew that as a daughter, I will not be able to be objective. I will not have that emotional distance from my father, So I did not even claim it to be a biography. And also, a friend of mine, while I was contemplating reading a book about it, I was thinking about the structure, I was thinking how to go about it, what should be the content of it, because already so much has been written on my father. Right. So a friend of mine, the celebrated writer Amitabh Ghosh, he said that make it your story. Also bring in a lot of element of what was the experience of growing up in a political family. So there is a lot of me in it. So it's a very personal, I would say, account of my father. I have really taken a lot from his diaries, which are again a very intimate document. And as for your, I don't know how you came to this conclusion that I have focused on the latter part of his career. I don't think that is right, because it is not just his political journey, it is also personal journey from a very small village in rural Bengal to Rashtrapati Bhavan. But I have spent a lot of time in his early days, because, he always used to consider Indira Gandhi as his mentor. And always by his own admission, that was the golden period of his life, because, he was simultaneously learning, applying, his administrative skills, his political skills. Indiraji was like a true mentor. She taught him even how to dress. So there is a full chapter devoted on that. So it is a chronological process. So Rashtrapati Bhavan is just one chapter, at the end of it. But it is a journey. So in my opinion, I don't think, I have kind of focused more on the later rather than the earlier.
I mean, I speak as a biographer, who spent 300 pages on the first few decades of his childhood and growing up years and so on. But fair enough, I get your point. And as you said, it's a daughter's account.
It's a very, very personal. And in any case, I believe that writing of history is somewhere, you also have to understand the historian, the background of the historian, from what perspective the person is writing from. So that way, I have very, very clearly written in my preface that this is only from perspective of Mr. Pranab Mukherjee, not even that, how I understood his perspective to be. So, because, I read his diaries after he passed away, so there was no chance of any clarification. So only unwritten words could be very deceptive sometimes. True. So what is my interpretation of his views are. So this is a very, very personal, not only from my perspective, but even from my father's perspective also. And he was always just one of the players in any of the key events. So the other players, they will perhaps have a very different perspective of the same story.
Amrita, coming back to you, the first time I interviewed Mr. Vajpayee's family members, all of them gave me very quotable quotes. But I realized that, when I went and spoke to them a few years later, because it took me a long time, and so when I spoke to them for the third time or the fourth time or fifth time, it turned out what they told me in the first meeting was more or less factually, incorrect. They were giving me quotable quotes which would work very well for a journalist if you're going to, put it in your copy the next day. But for a biographer who is interested in emotional or psychological examination of a subject or of a certain era, that the first meeting never quite, it was never sufficient. So I had to go back. Tell me your experience interviewing Vikram Sarabhai's family, friends, or lovers, if that was the case, and were they also reluctant to share information at first? What happened? How was the process of interview? Because we like it or not, partly due to the lack of archives, we end up relying too much on interviews. So, what was your experience interviewing for this project, the family and friends of Vikram Sarabhai?
Yeah, we do rely on, we have to at least in some cases. In this case, the Official Secrets Act, and there were many reasons why, and there were no physical archives easily sort of accessible. So that was a problem, and I did do a lot of interviews. I found
But did you get access to the private papers?
no.
Okay. And why was that, if I may ask? We share a curse in that case.
Yeah. Sometimes archivists are overprotective. Sometimes, there are various reasons. So I was given eventually at the end access to a diary in which he wrote. So I did use that. And that also had very little time, and I had to look at it very quickly and give it back. So there were a lot of problems, and I did rely on interviews quite a lot. I found what happened was, so what you say, like, with the people, his ex-colleagues, for instance, in various, he was in business and he was in science and the atomic energy program and all these things. All of them gave me like a prepared, it was like he did X many things, and he was head of this and head of that, and it was very boring. It was like so, and as if someone who's setting out to do a biography would not know these things, of course you would. So, but that's what I kept getting from colleagues. So then one would have to sort of sit there and, then lead them on a bit and push them to think. And so over time, they would give you sort of more thoughtful answers or more instinctive answers, So I'll give you an example. So for instance, one, I think I was interviewing someone who worked in one of the companies that Sarabhai was head of. And first it was this, he did this, and he was such a great man. And I said, okay. And then I talked about, and then he started telling me how when he left, the only thing he said he took from his office was a portrait of Sarabhai. And he started crying. And that happened really often, After a while, if you just stay and sort of let them give the spiel, then they start talking about small things like what he did. He was a very thoughtful man. So, they started telling me stories about what he offered to, because he knew there was an illness in someone's family, he offered to kind of help by transferring that person somewhere, or to changing the paint of the walls because the wife was allergic to, so these little things. But with the family, it was very unusual and very different.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So, it's a very distinguished and illustrious and a family of sort of everyone's a star. So that was a problem because I had very little time, so it was with each person. I think I could only get one or two, or, it was not easy to pin them down, to sort of get time with them. On the other hand, because they were such intelligent and, such sort of sophisticated people, what they shared, it was amazing. Like each interview was gold, because They were very honest. They shared very freely, but they had thought about things, you know. So it was quite an odd experience. I didn't get the kind of time that, let's say, you know, where you just sit around and then something comes up and some memory comes up, and I didn't get that. But on the other hand, as I said, you know, I got these very feeling, very thoughtful, very reflective interviews with the family.
And by the end of it, you felt you had kind of got him right, got his psyche right.
Yeah, but then there was lots of additional things. So, okay, so I also had the advantage that, for instance, Mrinalini Sarabhai, there was already a biography on her by some writer. I think she was American, I'm not sure, but it was a slim little book. So I had that. She wrote her own autobiography or memoir by the time I finished. So I also had things like that, written material. So that helped a lot. And then I did lots of research around it. So for instance, I found a book by a New Zealand physicist who happened to be in Cambridge at the same time as Vikram Sarabhai and Mrinalini. So, you know, I got an idea of what, it was the coldest winter that year. These kind of details, I really had to, I don't know, be really resourceful and try and find stuff to build up the, but yeah, I think in the end I felt okay.
Right. Your problems were different from ours, like with Amrita, and in my case, or with any other traditional biographer. Our problem is that we know too little. Your problem was you know too much. So tell me, how did you decide what to include and what not to include in your book? And even if very briefly, could you tell us about certain bits that you may not have wanted to include, you did not touch for whatever reasons? And I totally get it, because if I were writing a book about my parents, I would also be very cautious. So I'm not judging you in that sense, but as a general reader, as well as a biographer, I would want to know, were there some certain things that you said, okay, this is something I do not want to touch, or not want to touch right now, maybe 20 years later, I'll pass it on to somebody to write. Yeah.
Well, firstly, let me tell you that I also had my own difficulties, not in terms of not knowing my father, but just not knowing the subject. You know, because I was a very late, I entered politics very late, and believe me or not, I was just simply not interested in politics. So, for example, like my father wrote that the Jain Commission report was tabled in the parliament, and it created a lot of uproar. Now, what is Jain Commission report? I was just simply clueless about it. So then you have to go on, you know, you find keys and you have to go on, researching around it. Secondly, you know, as I say that I don't consider it a biography, because I think the biography needs to tackle many aspects of a person. So I haven't really touched upon Pranab Mukherjee as an administrator. I really haven't touched upon Pranab Mukherjee as a parliamentarian. You know, parliament was his first love. And because for that, I probably needed to, you know, go through, not probably, I mean, any serious researcher would need to go through all his speeches over the decades, need to go through, you know, different times where he intervened and how he kind of negotiated with the opposition to break log jams. So that's a different ballgame altogether, you know. So here in this particular book, other than his personal and political journey, I focused, you know, because it was relatively simpler for me, that how was his experience of working under different prime ministers. So I have focused on that, and some very interesting tidbits came out of it, because obviously in his, even in his political autobiography also, I would say they were far more sanitized. But whereas, you know, a diary you're far more open to it. You know, so many things, you know, he left out. He didn't say, you know. But which I found, and I had been very open and honest about it. As far as leaving out things are concerned, again, probably it, basically originated from my lack of knowledge of how the government works. Some things which I felt perhaps might not be in public domain, and I was not very sure whether to bring it out in the public domain. For example, there is a lengthy, you know, many references of back channel diplomacy with Pakistan. And Satinder Lamba, the former diplomat, was involved in it, and he would regularly come and brief my father. So there are detailed entries on that. But I was not sure that whether I should, how public it is, how whether I was not very sure about it, so I didn't touch. But as I had sent my, like the first draft, then I realized, and then I learned that Satinder Lamba himself has written a book on this. So there are many things, probably because of, again, as I say, because I did not definitely want to violate the Official Secrets Act. And because my father was involved in the government for so many years, so anything which I was not very sure about, I did not touch upon it. But I would say that his diaries, because it's 51 volumes, so there is a lot of information, lot of material in it. But if I ever venture into, writing another book, and probably I will collaborate with somebody, some very senior former bureaucrat who would be, knowing a lot more about the administrative procedures and the, rules and regulations of the government. Maybe I can collaborate with such a person. And I don't know, let's see, So those are the only things I have left out, Otherwise, as I say, and also said that, I haven't really touched upon him as an administrator, what kind of his policies in different ministries he held. So every book needs to have an angle. So my focus, my angle of this book was his personal and political journey in general, and as I said that, his relationship with different prime ministers he has worked with. So it is again a very narrow focused view. I don't claim it to be a very, it didn't touch upon all the aspects of his life.
Sure. And since I'm also an archive hound, I hope that at some point in your life, you would give away your diaries
Yes,
to
yes,
Tirumurti
yes,
Library,
yes,
if
yes.
Tirumurti still survives, or some other archive at
In
a
fact,
public
they
university.
have offered, very kindly offered to house his papers and his diaries. And so I told them that yes, papers, definitely. Diaries, they have to wait till my death, because those are also a very, very, those are the most precious gift my father has left me. So I can't emotionally
Part away
afford
with
to
it.
part
Yeah,
with
yeah,
those. But yes, I have made my will, so they are going to go to that archive.
Okay, great.
A question.
Sure.
I want to just know what the diaries look like.
Like normal diaries?
Are they exercise books or what are they?
No. They are normal diaries, like like every year. And he had a habit of writing a page per day. And only towards the end of his life, like his post retirement after the post presidential years, then he had more time, so he would write at length. So, but these are like normal, like every year diaries with the date and everything. Yeah.
Amrita, we were just talking that Vikram Sarabhai died rather very young. He was 52 when he died in 1971. And
And I just couldn't. It was inconceivable to me that a person who of such significance, if you read television history, media history, perhaps, but just again very little, just the early site experiment, and that's it. So, yes, I think it became a bit of an obsession that why is he not? He doesn't figure in biographies of political leaders. He doesn't. Why does he just not figure in modern Indian? So. And so anyway, yes, it was a motivation. But I think he was a person who really thought far ahead of his time. He started the space program at a time when, nobody thought a poor country should have a space program. It's sort of sophisticated and expensive program like that. But his reasoning was always that he wanted to use technology for development. And so it was not like a luxury. It was not an indulgence. It was not to, show off India's greatness or anything like that. It was pure and simple. Use it for weather mapping, for climate to tell fishermen, to tell people, farmers, for education, and those were the kind of sort of impulses that were driving him. And if you look now, I mean, the reason why the space program is one of our success stories, and from many kind of perspectives, what it does and how well we have achieved that. And that, of course, also because of the people who came after Sarabhai, who, took it further. But in terms of cost effectiveness and in every way, and how well thought out it was, the program. But I think his sort of relevance is wider. He did many things. He set up an institution of, co-founded Institute of Dance, of Design, with, of course, with his wife and his siblings. And he co-founded the Indian Institute of Management. So I was curious to see what was uniting.
Yeah.
And it was science, in a way. If you understand him and his love for science, and he brings all these things together with that unifies it with his approach to science. And I think to me, he was a figure that was very important in the kind of one of the people who was important in the making of modern India, or the idea of what modern India should be. And I think that is very relevant. The idea of what a country can be. We don't have to take it, or, you can change it or reject it or whatever, but to understand that one should have a vision and a thought and an idea to inspire, not just develop madly without knowing where we're heading, or without thinking of the aesthetic and the cultural implications,
A cool Renaissance man.
Yes, yeah, I think so.
Right. Great. Sharmishtha, we know Mukherjee faced a lot of flack for for addressing Swamsevaks at the RSS headquarters in Nagpur when he was the president. Sorry, yeah. Just a few years after he retired. He also famously got along rather very well with Mr. Modi, which, as a biographer of Mr. Vajpayee, I find interesting because Vajpayee did not get along very well with K.R. Narayanan at all. So tell us, did Pranab Mukherjee's views on Sangh Parivar change over time? And if yes, how and why?
No, I don't think it changed over time. But, at that time, I was fully involved in politics. And I was also very swayed by this argument that by going to RSS, Pranab Mukherjee is giving legitimacy to RSS. I was totally, at home there was a complete situation of war. I was like really after him to withdraw his acceptance. And
tell us more. Tell us.
Yes.
Oh, that is interesting.
I have written at length in the book also. And I was very angry. I was like totally, fretting, fuming, shouting at him, ranting, raving, raging, everything. So he was absolutely silent. And I think people who knew him as Sir Manishankarji, so when he wanted to remain quiet, he could really remain quiet. He wouldn't answer. Only once he got very irritated with me when I was just repeating this line that, we are giving legitimacy to RSS by going there. So then he said, who am I to give legitimacy to RSS? The people of India have given legitimacy to RSS by choosing one of their pracharaks with huge mandate. And if you choose to ignore that, it's only at your own peril. And anyway, so I was so angry, I left home, and also to avoid the journalists. So I left home, I went to a hill retreat for a few days. And then a rumor spread that I'm joining BJP. It was just the day before he was supposed to address RSS. So I was very angry, and I tweeted that now perhaps my father's Twitter handle was Citizen Mukherjee, tagging him. He would realize that, why I was objecting and this and that, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, then, now later, much later, I thought that he was holding on to his belief that in democracy, dialogue is the most important thing. You might not agree with that person's ideology. You might totally oppose it. But you cannot stop dialogue. And it's ironical that, from RSS platform, he actually preached Congress ideology of pluralism, inclusivity, secularism. He quoted there Betanor Pandit Nehru from RSS platform. And so he actually used the RSS platform to talk about the core values of Congress. So this is something, much later I realized that no matter what, he was, being true to the Congress ideology. He might have made the Congress high command very unhappy, but he did not betray the Congress ideology. And once he jokingly told the journalist Sonia Singh later that I wanted to go to the tiger's den and talk to them. So in a way, actually, it's very easy to preach to a friendly audience. It's very easy to, play on a friendly pitch. But to literally go to, like some people who are totally opposed to your ideology and to talk about your ideology, your values, Congress values from their pitch, playing at their ground, at your own terms. So I think, I later thought that it perhaps takes a different kind of courage. As far as your question about the equation with Mr. Modi, yes, I definitely think there was a personal chemistry between these two, whatever the reason might be. But one of the main reason, they never came into, their differences never came into public, was my father's interpretation of his role, constitutional role as of the president. Because he always believed, and he wrote in his autobiography also, and I read it in his diaries also, and he said it in numerous speeches, that it is the job of the executive to govern. It is the job of the executive to decide on policies and act upon them. So the president should not interfere. And it was not that there were not differences. There were, many instances, again I have written about whether it's Uttarakhand, imposition of president's rule in Uttarakhand, whether it was demonetization, and many other instances where there were differences. But they were all within closed doors. So he never, let these differences, that was his view of his presidentship, right and wrong, that was his interpretation, that what should the role of the president should be. That is why there was never any kind of confrontation. And towards the end, just I think about a day or two before his demitting charge as the president, he wrote in his diaries, which I read later, that since the last 5 years, I asked myself every day that what should my role as president be? Should I be an activist president? But no, as far as my interpretation of the role is concerned, that it is the job of the executive to govern, and activism might get me headlines, but headlines die within 2 minutes. So he was a copybook president as per his own belief, and he chose to remain a copybook president. I think that was one of the reasons where the president and the prime minister, despite different ideologies, did not come into. And another very interesting anecdote, which I heard from Mr. Modi himself, when he first actually went to meet Baba after winning this thing in 2014. So actually, when he always would touch Baba's feet, and then he said, "Dada, you should guide me as your younger brother," and all that kind of stuff. So. So anyway, so Baba said that, we belong to two different ideologies, but the people have given you the mandate to rule. I'm not going to interfere in that. If you need any advice on constitutional matters, I will definitely advise you. And while telling it to me, Mr. Modi said that Dada ke liye ye baat कहना बहुत बड़ी बात थी. So I think somewhere he also feared that the president, because he was coming right from being a very active member of the UPA 1 and 2 cabinet. Then he became the president. So I think, after becoming the president, my father really tried to distance himself psychologically as well as, in terms of everyday this thing that, like he's no longer involved in any kind of party politics. And that is not the job of the president. So I think that answers the question.
Okay, thank you. We are running out of time. If somebody in the audience wants to ask a question, yes, sir, please. The most popular man in the audience.
Yes, Madhina.
I am a bit scared now.
I have one question to ask you as a daughter, and another question to ask you as a Congress activist. The question as a daughter is that during the dog days, when your father's past was obliterated, his future certain, that was when Rajiv Gandhi became Prime Minister and sidelined him for a period of nearly 3.5 years, from December 1984 to January of 1988. He was finished as a politician. At that time, as a daughter, did you find him, how did he react personally to that bad period of his life? And my question to you as a Congress activist is, did the Congress make a huge mistake when instead of making him the Prime Minister of India in 2012, they made him the President of India? My own view is that we would not be in the position in which we are today if he had been made Prime Minister. And it was the worst thing the Congress ever did to itself when they made him the President instead of the Prime Minister. I'd like your views on it as a Congressperson.
Sir, to answer your first question, as it happened, it was around 84, 85. And this is one of the greatest regrets of my life, that I really did not spend much time with him at that time. He was very low. And this was perhaps, other than his post-presidential years, that was one period when he actually had time. But I had just joined college, and as a college-going young youth, your interests are far different. I was involved with my dance, with boyfriends, so you are not really bothered about, whether your father is depressed or not. So, I do regret it. I do regret not spending more time with him at that time and not being able to, perhaps, as a daughter, you can give some solace to your father. But I think as a daughter, I failed in that duty. But fine, I also take it that that was perhaps the immaturity of the age, so it's no point blaming yourself. About your second question, sir, as a daughter, again, I will not be able to answer, and that's not right for me to answer also. But I think this is for the senior politicians like you, this is for the journalists, this is for the, the students of, Indian politics. It is for them to answer that question. As a daughter, I can't and I should not answer that question.
Yeah, he asked you as somebody who was in Congress.
Sir, as a Congress person also, my understanding of politics and exposure to politics is very limited. It's 6 years. This is a very, it takes, I would say, a far more nuanced, experienced answer to actually, that whether he would have been a better Prime Minister or not. In fact, I had asked him once that, Baba, perhaps you would have been a better Prime Minister. So he immediately snapped and said that, this is your subjective opinion, and Dr. Manmohan Singh's daughters would have a very different response. So he would also not very clearly talk about it. But that's why I'm saying it, sir, it's not for me to answer this question. I will not be able to answer it. Thank you.
Okay, we've run out of time. Any more questions? We can just take a quick
Just
question.
one at least.
Anyone?
No, I just wanted to say that you said, your father said that this is you are a daughter and it's your viewpoint. Manmohan Singh's daughters can have another viewpoint. I think Manmohan Singh's daughters were teaching you in college. Maybe they spoilt your mind.
Sharmishtha Singh was a history teacher. He's like my classmates from Stephen.
Okay, thank you very much. We've run out of time. Thank you for attending this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you for conducting it, Abhishek, and to all of you, thank you for this wonderful conversation.